I must have blacked out for a while. I remember I was talking to Tygan and something he said caused me to have some sort of existential crisis. But then, the next thing I knew, I was just back in his lab. And he was there, staring at me, as if waiting for me to say or do something. I apologized, mumbling something about a headache, and he eagerly volunteered to crack my head back open to make sure everything was okay in there. Though he did recommend that we build a proper infirmary first, if I wanted to improve the odds of surviving the procedure. I politely declined the offer, but I did have to admit that an infirmary was a good idea. We had a few injured troops, and more were certain to be injured in the future, so we could really use some proper medical facilities. Unfortunately, with Lily Shen preoccupied with keeping the Avenger in the air, we just didn't have anyone available to build an infirmary at the moment. Perhaps sensing my frustration, Tygan mentioned that our new researcher had pitched an interesting project involving upgrading the modularity of our standard-issue shotguns. It was a rather abrupt shift in subject, leaping from infirmaries to shotguns, though I do suppose they're not entirely unrelated. You can put someone in an infirmary with a shotgun, after all. I think he was just trying to help in his own weird way by giving me something else to think about. I approved the project and began the walk back towards my quarters in hopes of finding a way to clear my head. My comlink beeped, and with another sigh, I headed back up to the bridge instead. Bradford was waiting for me, another report in hand, this time on some group of violent arsonists who had been lighting local Advent colonies on fire. He had apparently taken it upon himself to encourage them to continue that sort of depraved behavior, and in return they had given him contact information for their local resistance cell. What was Bradford up to this time? He always seemed to have some ulterior motive. Perhaps sensing that I was growing suspicious, Bradford took the opportunity to pass along another message from Mordena. As nice as it was to hear more of her clumsy flirtations, I had bigger concerns at the moment. I carefully weighed my options, then gave the order to pursue further communications with the resistance group he had contacted. He smiled and assured me that I had made the right decision, but suddenly I wasn't so sure. In no time at all, he had already set up some temporary communications and was negotiating in earnest with their leader, someone codenamed Denmother. They seemed reluctant, perhaps having heard some bad things about our organization's methods, but Bradford persisted. And then, for one fleeting second, his altruistic mask fell away as he passive-aggressively told them to enjoy the peace and quiet while it lasted. Seconds later, word came in that Advent had conveniently discovered the location of the arsonists' camp. Bradford feigned innocence, but the timing seemed much too convenient. I quickly ordered the bridge crew to set course for the camp and sent word down to the barracks that we needed a squad ready for immediate mobilization. The whole time, Bradford seemed fascinated with the ongoing live feed of the arsonists being slaughtered by Advent peacekeepers. I was about to say something to him when something on the screen caught my eye. One of the arsonists was there, his skin falling away to reveal some sort of hideous creature beneath it. Had Bradford somehow known that thing was there all along? When he saw me looking, he quickly turned off the monitor, ushering me off to oversee the squad deployment. After all, he chuckled, it was in our best interest to intervene before all of the arsonists were dead, wasn't it? I didn't like the way he had phrased that, but I couldn't argue the point. We only had enough space on the dropship for 4 men, so I quickly went through the manifest and picked out a team. Phoenix was an obvious choice, given his training as a field medic. Given the carnage I'd glimpsed before Bradford had shut off the feed, I knew they were going to be injured and in need of help. But I wasn't naive. Advent had come in guns blazing, so we would need guns down there too. It was a dangerous mission, so I asked for volunteers. The Bear was the first to step up, followed closely by Messer and Vlad Kapesh. Apparently the 3 of them had all worked together in the past, doing recon and raiding, I think. I wasn't really clear on the details. The Avenger arrived on site, and I quickly deployed the squad, before it was too late.
One of our contacts in the Resistance says Advent peacekeepers have been spotted conducting a sweep near an outpost in this area. The aliens won't hesitate to kill anyone they find, so we're heading in to protect as many people as we can. Secure the camp and eliminate all hostile forces.
Hey, RetconRaider here, and here we are on our first Haven Defense mission. I'm going to say right up front, this is probably my least favorite type of mission, just because of how random it can be.
Hostile forces are attacking the outpost. Eliminate all enemy units and protect those civilians. Advent came in hot and so did we. You won't have a concealed position for deployment on this one.
Timed missions annoy me a little, but at least with timed missions, you know at any given moment how much time you have left, so you can plan accordingly. But with these civilian rescue missions, you have no idea where the enemies or the civilians are going to spawn, so you just have to try to get out there as fast as possible, and hope that you can grab enough civvies before it's too late.
Orders confirmed, on the move.
Oh good, we've discovered the slowest garage door ever made. Well, it doesn't look like there's anyone inside the building anyway, so I guess we'll just get everyone up on the roof. Hopefully we'll be able to spot at least a few civilians from an elevated position.
Roger that. That's affirmative.
Well, there's at least one enemy pod. Looks like a sectoid and an Advent trooper. Unfortunately, they're so far away, I'm sure we're going to see them slaughtering several civilians before we can reach them.
Roger. Good copy, moving on target. Roger that.
Okay, there we go. There's our first civilian over there in that little shed. I'll probably split the squad into two groups, one group heading for that shed and the other heading in the other direction, just so I can rescue as many civilians as quickly as possible. Whoops, and that's exactly what I didn't want. Now I'm stuck dealing with an active Advent pod, with some of my soldiers having already used their actions for the turn. Okay, now I could just have WOTC jump down there and flank this guy with his heavy chain gun, but that risks activating another pod, and it would leave him in a flanked position. So instead I think we're just going to have Vlad use his grenade to kill this guy the easy way. There's another civilian just behind that priest. I give it 50-50 odds that he'll either attack us or turn around and take that guy out instead. Well, at least we have visual on multiple civilians now. Now I suppose the question is, how many of these guys are actually shape-shifting monsters? The correct answer is probably too many. Oh, okay. Well, he just put Roderick into stasis. Assuming that's the same ability that your psionic troopers can get access to, that's actually not bad. I mean, Roderick loses his turn, but he's also immune to incoming attacks until the stasis wears off. Okay, now more importantly, we know that that priest has placed himself in a terrible defensive position, so we can easily flank him here. I just want to be careful about how far forward I move so I don't accidentally trigger another pod while I'm dealing with this guy. That was a nice solid shot, and now he seems to be having some kind of psychic meltdown. He has the sustained status. Well, that's fine. I'll just flank him from the other side and finish him off. Or, maybe not. I guess he must have just put himself in stasis now. Well, we'll set Vlad into Overwatch just in case. Now, unfortunately, Messer is currently incapacitated, so WOTC is going to have to start heading towards those other civilians by himself. Again, I'm hesitant to move him too far because I don't want to risk triggering an enemy pod while the rest of my team is otherwise occupied. But I want to get him at least a little closer. That tricky bastard. His stasis wears off early enough that he still gets his turn. Well, good thing Vlad was at the ready. It's cool, people. Don't run away from the alien with the plasma pistol or anything. Alright, now it's time to split up into two teams. One's going to head towards the sheds over to the side, and one's going to head up into the parking lot out front. In fact, using my X-ray vision, I can actually see that there are two civilians right under the awning and inside the front room here. So hopefully I can grab both of them in a single turn.
Closing on target position now. You're safe now. Go, go, go!
I can't seem to open this door. Ah, there we go. I guess the awning must have been blocking it.
On the move. You're clear! Move out! Heading out.
Now, once I get into this shipping container, that's almost certainly going to put me within visual range of that other pod that's slaughtering civilians. So for the moment, I'm going to hold back a little. I'm a little worried about Faceless too, so I want to get the guys into position for a rescue, but not so close that if a Faceless procs, it'll immediately be able to slaughter us.
On my way. Got it covered.
No, not Bronislav Skala. Now, you may be wondering why Bradford isn't constantly whining at me about all these civilian casualties. I was trying to avoid using mods for this run-through, with the exception of a couple of cosmetic mods. But I couldn't resist putting in at least one mod that increases the pacing, just so we can move the action along a little faster. You can see a list of which mods I'm using down in the description. Now, at this point, I don't think I can move up any further without actually triggering that enemy pod. Oh, and there they are.
You're safe.
Alright, well, first things first, let's move Wojtek up. He can move into a flanking position.
Affirmative. Moving out. Let's go! Move out!
Though I actually think we're going to go ahead and use his grenade launcher here. That'll do minor damage, but it'll also clear away his cover.
Grenade out!
And now the rest of the troops can get flanking shots on him.
Schon unterwegs!
Nicely done, Messer. You just earned yourself a promotion.
Moving to position.
That's almost a half and half chance of hitting him, so it's worth a shot. And it paid off.
Target eliminated. Come get some.
Sir? Sir, are you alright? Do you need me to call someone for you?
We've heard rumors about some kind of shapeshifters. I'm guessing this is it.
It is a remarkable species. If only we had some means of containment.
Don't even think about it.
Oh, that wacky Tygan. Always eager to find new creatures he can perform brain surgery on. Okay, at this point we have one Faceless to deal with, and we have a general idea of where the third and hopefully last enemy pod is. But we're getting pretty close to a fail state here. We still need to rescue at least 2 more civilians, and there are only 4 left on the board. Alright, I need to get some soldiers into position to take out this faceless, but I have to be careful not to accidentally expose their flanks to the last pod.
On my way.
Whoops, okay, well I clearly misread the target preview. I meant to move Vlad into a position where he could fire on the faceless. But at least he's still relatively safe in that position. Phoenix doesn't have line of sight from this position either, but I think that's because Messer is blocking him.
Heading there now.
But this position should work. And we've got visual on 2 more civilians too. Hopefully they won't turn out to be faceless. And then I can move Messer. Actually, wait, that's a terrible idea. That other pod is still over there. Alright, well let's take a chance instead. We'll just assume that Messer is going to be able to finish off this thing. Nicely done. Okay, so that just leaves WOTC, but again, I don't want to accidentally activate that last pod when all of my other soldiers have already taken their actions. So I'm going to move him pretty conservatively. Good thing I did too, because here comes that last pod.
Missed the target.
Okay, let's see what our relative positioning is here. Missed the flanking shot. That's disappointing. Alright, well I don't think anyone else can get any flanking shots, but let me check the angles here. I may just end up having to use WOTC's other grenade to finish off that trooper so the rest of our guys can focus on the sectoid.
Okay.
I think I'll just end up taking a chance here again. Let's go ahead and get Phoenix over into this flanking position.
Understood. Moving out.
Nice. Now this does potentially open him up to a flanking shot in return, but odds are that that sectoid is going to try to raise that dead trooper as a zombie instead. It's not guaranteed, of course, I might end up regretting this, but I think the odds are in my favor enough that I feel reasonably confident. But just to hedge my bets, let's get Vlad into an Overwatch position here. I think the presence of Overwatch does affect the AI's decisions when it comes to things like this.
Come get some.
Aha! Vindication. Psychic zombie on the field. And even better, that sectoid just took cover behind a nice combustible vehicle.
No respite for the dead. The aliens have found a way to mind control them now.
Alright, well I'm going to completely ignore the zombie and move WOTC up. He can conveniently rescue this civilian and lob a grenade into that van.
Now. Go! Get out of here! Catch!
Okay, that was enough to set the van on fire, but not enough to blow it up. Let's see if I can find a good flanking shot with Phoenix here. Doesn't look like it. Well, Messer's still got a frag grenade, so maybe he can get close enough to nudge the van over. This is a bit of a risky move because if it doesn't blow up the van, then he's going to be stuck right there while that zombie beats him to death. Ah, that did it.
Menace 1-5, status confirmed. We're not picking up any additional contacts. The AO is clear. Status confirmed. Mission accomplished.
The Advent administration again assures its citizens that outreach efforts in the border territories will continue despite the recent brutal assault on peacekeeping forces by XCOM radicals. The administration is committed to ensuring a safe and secure world for everyone.
And once again, the XCOM radicals put a stop to Advent's noble intentions.
Our troops are making it look easy out there, Commander.
Alright, let's see here. Phoenix is up a level, and I've already started med-specking him, so I should probably take Revival Protocol, but I really love Haywire Protocol. No, I'll stay the course. I'll go ahead and keep him as a med-spec specialist, and then I'll have other combat spec specialists too. Alright, now it looks like Messer has become a sharpshooter. And poor Vlad has decided to become a grenadier. I think that's actually the exact opposite of what he wanted. Well, if it's any consolation, I tend to make heavier use of specialists and grenadiers than any other class, so that'll at least ensure he gets more time in the field. And that was it. The attack was over. Our men had all made it back unscathed, but 5 of the arsonists and 6 of the Advent peacekeepers had died in the pointless conflict. Our research team quickly recovered the corpse of that shapeshifting thing, something Tygan had decided to call the Faceless. He suggested it was probably just some sort of covert agent for the Advent Authority, but he was eagerly looking forward to dissecting it. The council spokesman was quick to contact me. While he agreed that the loss of life had been tragic, it had apparently swayed the arsonists to our side, and they had already agreed to start paying XCOM in exchange for our ongoing protection. They were already sending out their first payment, a veritable king's ransom, with the promise of more as long as we could keep them safe from further attacks. Although the whole incident had achieved a net positive result, the spokesman agreed that he had some doubts about the direction that XCOM was currently headed in. I was exhausted, and when I got back to my quarters, I was surprised to find another message from Mordenna waiting for me. Although I did enjoy our usual sly wordplay and subtle innuendo, this time she seemed genuinely sympathetic. Apparently she was just as troubled by what had happened as I was. I'm sure it was no coincidence that Bradford sent me a report shortly afterwards, vilifying Mordenna by claiming that she was trying to disrupt our newly established protection racket. He warned me that, in the wake of our recent success, Advent was also looking to mobilize more heavily armed peacekeepers, and were even dispatching a recon vehicle in an active attempt to hunt us down. But with our new support from the spokesman and the steadily growing resistance movement, he assured me that we would be able to stay one step ahead of Advent. He had already made arrangements with the Reapers to disrupt their early warning systems. He also mentioned that the Reapers had reached out to us with a few promising covert operations. My eyes were immediately drawn to the mention of Praetal Mox, the soldier who had been captured by Mordenna. He was still alive. I knew she wasn't the sort to kill people in cold blood, and it turned out that Mox was just being held prisoner at an Advent rehabilitation facility. While I was intrigued by the idea of reaching out to the Templars, my mind was already made up. I assigned 2 of our newer troops, Don Neal and Mark Richards, to investigate the facility, in hopes that they could find a way to rescue him with a minimum of bloodshed. It would take a while for Don and Mark to report back, and Bradford was still busy negotiating terms with the arsonist camp, so I busied myself with some other mundane upkeep around the Avenger. Tygan and his new assistant had finished upgrading all of the shotguns in the armory, and I could see that he was getting antsy. It had been a while since he'd had an excuse to cut someone open, so I reluctantly approved his request for one of the dead Advent officers that we were keeping in cold storage. He didn't waste any time, having his assistant rush the corpse up to his operating room. I lingered for a moment, mostly out of morbid curiosity, and was horrified to see him pull on a welding mask and then start hacking into the body with a rotary saw. He didn't even bother removing the officer's armor first. While I had been busy indulging Tygan's rather disturbing hobbies, Bradford had finalized negotiations with the resistance camp in South Africa. Their former leader, Denmother, had been one of the first casualties during the clash with Advent's peacekeepers. This had conveniently made it that much easier for Bradford to negotiate an alliance that heavily favored XCOM. As we took the dropship down to meet the surviving rebels in person, I asked Bradford if this had been his plan all along. He just smiled and quickly excused himself, eager to collect our first tribute payment. When we got back to the Avenger, Tygan enthusiastically summoned the both of us to his operating room. He had finally prized the dead officer's helmet off, cutting through the peacekeeper's skull to plug a heavy-duty cable directly into his brain. It was a gruesome sight, but he claimed it was necessary to access the officer's brain implant. Though it did make me wonder why Tygan had started the operation by brutally hollowing out the corpse's ribcage with a power saw. I decided it was probably just best if I didn't ask about that. Bradford and Tygan traded a few light-hearted jokes about brain surgery before seeming to remember that I was in the room. They quickly moved on. Tygan explained that in studying the implant he had discovered that the Advent peacekeepers were linked into the same psychic network that I had been plugged into. Had they been playing the same game as well? It led to some interesting questions, but Bradford was quick to imply that I had been turned into some sort of alien weapon. Tygan presented a few basic arguments to support Bradford's position, even going so far as to pump a few thousand volts through the corpse he'd laid out on the table. It was the usual sort of nonsense punctuated with random brutality that I was coming to expect from our lead scientist. I was eager to move things along, so I tried to gently nudge him toward some sort of final conclusion. He smiled and explained that we were going to need to perform some more brain surgery. Of course. Why would I expect anything different? Only this time, the surgery needed to be done on a living Advent officer, using a new surgical tool he had come up with. It looked monstrous, like some sort of energized gauntlet made up of whirling blades. I wasn't eager to assign this sort of torture device to our field troops, but fortunately it turned out that we didn't have the proper facilities to build the prototype anyway. Tygan was disappointed, but he rebounded quickly, instead asking if we had any more corpses he could operate on. After all, he insisted, who knew what fascinating things he might be able to find inside them? I told him I'd take his request under consideration, but that for now he and his assistant should just focus on continuing to upgrade the weapons in the armory. He seemed disappointed, but thankfully he didn't argue. When I returned to my personal quarters, I found another message waiting for me, this time from the spokesman. Apparently our recent vicious attacks on the Advent Authority had finally spurred them into action. They were channeling an unprecedented quantity of resources towards some new, secretive project. The spokesman wasn't sure what the project was, but Bradford had convinced him that we couldn't take any chances. The spokesman now seemed to be completely on board with the idea of preemptively wiping out the Advent research facilities, just in case. I wasn't so sure about this plan. After all, what if Advent's new project turned out to be a cure for all human diseases or some new way to feed millions of people? But Bradford quickly voiced his own support of the plan. I was just a token figurehead anyway, so there was no point in being the lone voice of dissent. I reluctantly agreed with their proposal, intent on at least trying to control the collateral damage as best I could. Afterwards, I finally received some good news. Don Neal and Mark Richards had just finished their recon on the prison facility where Mox was being held. Since they were already on site, I gave them the order to hold position, and I sent Demon out with some extra equipment so they could gear up for a proper rescue mission. Mark quickly picked out one of Lily's mobile hacking drones, and Don instead kitted himself out with a shotgun and machete. Demon seemed content to strap the rest of the dropship's arsenal onto his back. At least no one would ever accuse him of being under-equipped. Once they were ready, I gave the order for them to begin the operation.
took some work, but we now have a positive confirmation that our captive soldier is being held in a high-security Advent detention center in this region. If we're going to pull a rescue off, our best approach is to go in quietly without alerting the massive number of security forces defending that installation. The latest intel has our operative being held in the main structure just ahead. We have the advantage of stealth here, so we should try to get in and out as quietly as possible. If the enemy spots us, this is going to get a whole lot harder.
Since it seems that your soldiers are more likely to be captured with the new expansion, this mission is essentially a tutorial showing you how you can recover them once that inevitably happens. I've only played one or two of these missions so far, but it's at least given me a general idea of what I'm supposed to be doing here. You can see up in the top right there's a security level rating. That indicates how aware the enemies are of your presence. Early on, you're just dealing with the occasional lone wandering patrolmen and stationary turrets.
We have Firebrand on standby for evac, Commander, but as soon as she gets in range, the whole compound will go on high alert. We should hold back unless we have the target, or it's an absolute emergency.
Heading to that location.
But as the security level increases, reinforcements will start arriving on an almost turn-by-turn basis until you're inevitably overwhelmed. So, although it's a little boring, my main goal here is just to carefully skirt around the edge of the enemy facility, avoiding guards and turrets as long as possible. If I'm lucky, I'll be able to get all the way up to that prison cell where I can pick up mocks and then quietly leave without being noticed. You'll notice that for this mission, I do have one charge of concealment for each of my soldiers. So, if we do get spotted, we do have one chance to get back into stealth, but that will still raise the security level and start a slow but steady flow of reinforcements, which in turn, of course, will make it harder to stay in stealth.
Moving the designated coordinates.
Good to go.
Move, move, move. On the move.
Solid copy. Getting it done.
I'm on the move.
Stepping off. Time to motor.
Alright, so far so
Closing
good.
in target position now.
On the move. Let's do this.
I've got movement here. Moving to position. Hostile forces spotted. Roger that. On it. Go, go, go.
Now I think it's time to go ahead and extract Mox, and this is where I think it's going to get loud no matter what I do. There's an alarm on the door, but I can try to disable it as one of the optional goals for the hacking check. I'm tempted to go for priority data, but I think in this case it's more important to keep the alarm from going off. Nicely done, Mark. Now I'm going to move Don Neal in there to grab Mox, and I'm going to position Demon somewhere where he can create a quick exit for us with his grenade launcher.
Affirmative. Moving out. The VIP is secure and we're on the move.
I like how they went through the trouble of putting cots inside these prison cells, but didn't actually bother to put Mox on one. He's just lying on the floor under the cot. That's cool. Maybe the aliens just think that cots are some sort of miniature shelters intended to protect you from roof collapses. Actually, we may not even need to blow out a wall. That door there may be close enough that we can actually extract in a single turn.
Confirmed. Good copy. Moving on target.
Alright, at this point I have to set off the alarm. It's going to go off when I call the Sky Ranger, or it's going to go off when I pick up Mox. So I might as well do both in the same turn.
Can I get an evac here?
Firebrand is in position and the compound is on full alert. Time to move.
I gotcha.
Good work, Don. Now quickly, carry him to the gates of Valhalla yourself, shiny and chrome.
I'm all over it.
VIP secure.
Now, I could stick around and take some pot shots at the incoming alien reinforcements, but they're going to be coming in pretty fast, so with only 2 soldiers on the field, I think it's best if we just, vamoose.
Just in time.
All XCOM operatives are secure. Firebrand is returning to base.
Everything by the numbers. Mission accomplished.
I suppose after having allowed them to be captured, the least you could do is mount a rescue attempt.
Ah, the lovely Mordena, always the voice of reason. But I will admit that went a lot more smoothly than I had anticipated.
I ask you, loyal citizens, to memorize the faces of the vile criminals freed by XCOM. Report them immediately upon sight. You are the eyes of Advent. You are the will of the elders. Together, we shall prevail.
See, now, some people are under the assumption that Advent are trying to keep the existence of human sectoid hybrids a secret, but clearly that's not the case. The speaker there just told the viewers to memorize the face of Mox, an alien-human hybrid. They're totally above board about this stuff. I'll admit it was nice to see things go smoothly for once. The men were a little disappointed by the lack of carnage, but they were happy to come back unscathed. And Praethel Mox was certainly happy to be back as well. He even offered to treat several of us to dinner down in the barracks. He called up his favorite restaurant and ordered Vox Tala for 10. What's more, the skirmishers were also happy to see Mox free again. I was contacted by their leader, a fetching young mutant named Betos. She pledged her support, and she seemed nice enough for a mutant terrorist, but I think for now my heart still belongs to that purple vixen, Mordena. Still, all in all, it was a pleasant end to an otherwise nightmarish month of navigating the labyrinthine plots that were being built up all around me. I was still in well over my head, but for the first time since they got me out of the tube, I was starting to feel like I might actually be able to change things for the better. All things considered, I should have probably known better.